No alien wanted the paralyzed alien girl, so they gave her to a human. But he fell in love with her. They gave her away like a faulty relic, and he took her in like she was sacred. That was how it began, not with a ceremony, not with honor, but with a quiet transaction on a half-lit plaza beneath the memory-lit sky of Aruvia. And in the breathless stillness of that moment, something shifted. Not loudly, not visibly, but irrevocably. The moon of Aruvia never slept. Its twin suns dipped low each rotation, but darkness never truly settled. The archives pulsed with soft, golden light, stories stored in crystalline cores, breathing memory into the air itself. The architecture curved like bone, ancient and organic, each corridor laced with scentless blooms that responded to thought. This was a place where history was alive, and silence wasn't absence. It was structure. Derek Cale stood waiting at the base of the plaza steps, his coat collar turned up against the thin, ever-sifting air. The moon's atmosphere had been terraformed just enough to support breath, but it still tasted artificial, like recycled air on a slow ship. He watched the incoming hover platform as it approached in slow, ceremonial silence. She was smaller than he expected. The woman didn't rise to greet him, didn't speak, didn't blink as the hover chair came to a smooth stop on the polished stone. Her skin was a muted shade of dusk blue, not the luminous teal of her caste, faded like moonlight filtered through sorrow. Her hair, long and stark white, hung like a curtain down her back. No ornamentation, no clan sigil, no welcome. She kept her hands resting lightly on the control halo of the chair. Derek noticed the faint tremble in one finger. Not weakness, just restraint. A held breath that had lasted far too long. The Aruvian administrator handed Derek a scroll-like data slate. "You are now legally responsible for her," the official said, not even bothering to make eye contact with the woman in the chair. "Name?" Derek asked, despite already knowing. The official hesitated. "Avlithvar, formerly of the Mindweaver caste." Derek glanced at her again. She didn't flinch at the sound of her name, but something in her posture stiffened slightly, as if it were a sound she hadn't heard in years and wasn't sure she wanted to again. The hover chair shifted forward a few inches, unprompted, as if it couldn't stand still under the weight of this handover. He stepped closer. "I'm Derek. I'll be accompanying you." Still, she said nothing. They looked at each other, not as strangers, not as opponents. Like historians standing on either side of a lost ruin, both unsure of what remained intact inside. Then she turned her chair and moved toward the ramp, slow and steady. Not out of weakness, he realized, but out of control. There was dignity in that slowness. Defiance, even. He followed at a respectful distance. Inside the archive dwelling assigned to them, Derek guided her through the rooms with soft instructions. Voice-activated lighting. All entry codes are adjustable. You'll have complete control over your suite. No response. He didn't mind. Not yet. The dwelling was warm with filtered air, faintly floral, an artificial pollination meant to simulate Aruvia's pre-civilized atmosphere. But beneath its sweetness was the acidic scent of aged tech, oxidizing conduits, microdust, the fading trace of data gone stale. It reminded Derek of half-erased stories, forgotten rituals, orphan knowledge. He left her at the entrance to the larger private room. She hovered there without entering. He turned on the soft lighting and placed a folded blanket on the reclined seat of the resting pod. "I'll leave you space," he said quietly. "If you need anything, I'll be in the west alcove." He didn't wait for an answer. Didn't push. As he walked away, he imagined what it must feel like to be discarded by your own people, then handed over in silence like a defective heirloom. He didn't need her to talk to understand. Her eyes said enough. Still, something about her unnerved him. She didn't just look empty. She looked edited, like someone had reached into her soul and stripped it for parts. He'd seen relics like that before, names burned from stones, prayers scratched from temple walls. But never in a living being. Not like this. She was history that had tried to survive its erasure. And he felt the weight of that story pressing against the silence between them. That night, Derek boiled a cup of earthroot tea. It was bitter, strong enough to keep the chill out of his chest. Before sleeping, he poured a second cup and set on a small tray. He hesitated outside her door, listening, not to eavesdrop, just to feel if the silence inside was sleep or just another kind of waiting. He didn't knock, just left the tray there, along with a soft note. If you prefer silence, I understand. But you're not alone in this space. The door didn't open, but in the morning, the cup was empty. In the shadows of her room, Avlith sat motionless in the hover chair, watching the memory wall scroll through its nightly preservation cycles. Her name didn't appear anywhere in the public ledger. She'd been cast out, not just in law, but in legacy. The person who'd pushed her, Yerian, had once been her closest colleague, a fellow mindweaver, a childhood bondmate, someone she had once trusted with her breath rhythms and ancestral strands. And when the ceiling cracked in the archive vault and she'd reached back for help, he had turned away. Or worse, pushed. She didn't remember the fall, but she remembered his eyes just before it happened. And worse, she remembered the silence afterward, the way the council had closed ranks, how her own family had wrapped the incident in ceremonial lies and let her name be removed from the caste registry, like rot from a tree. Avlith didn't cry anymore. Grief was something her people were trained to excise. Emotion blurred clarity. Emotion made memory impure. But she remembered. Every detail. Every breath. That was her rebellion now. She didn't speak because they wanted her to plead. She didn't ask because they expected desperation. And she didn't flinch, except once, when Derek had touched the hover panel beside her to activate the entry gate. His fingers had brushed the side of her chair. Just for a moment. She'd pulled her hand away, quick. But later, as the night deepened and the system dimmed, she adjusted her chair slightly, not to face away from the corridor, but toward it. It wasn't much, just an angle, but it meant something, a fragment of trust, lodged like crystal beneath the surface. Derek, sitting across the dwelling in the western alcove, stared into the glow of his lens pad. He couldn't stop seeing her eyes. Not cold, not broken, just withheld, like a language waiting for the right speaker. He thought of her not as disabled, but dissonant, out of sync with a world that had turned her into static. And for some reason, that image stayed with him. He didn't know why he had said yes to this assignment. He told the council it was for access to the sealed Eruvian vaults. That was true, technically, but there were easier ways. The truth? When he saw her file, redacted, half erased, wrapped in layers of bureaucratic shame, he felt something stir in him. Not pity, never pity. Curiosity, recognition, a forgotten story, waiting to be heard. The silence in the room thickened as both of them drifted into uneasy sleep. One in a hover chair angled toward a closed door, the other curled in an archivist's cot, dreaming of fire-eyed ghosts and names carved in disappearing light. Nothing had begun yet, but something had shifted, and neither of them could unfeel it. The next morning on Eruvia came quietly, cloaked in a pale amber light that slipped through the arched crystal windows like a memory, returning slowly to the surface. Nothing rushed here. Even the air moved in long, deliberate currents, stirred by the artificial winds of the atmospheric regulators buried beneath the moon's stone skin. Derek stood in the kitchen alcove, steeping 2 cups of tea again, just as he had the night before. He didn't expect her to drink it, but she had, quietly, without acknowledgement. And in its own way, that silent acceptance had meant more than words. He placed the second cup on the floor outside her door, same spot, same angle, then retreated to the central archive chamber, letting the silence between them stretch without forcing it into meaning. If she wanted to speak, she would. If not, the space he offered would remain open. But he hadn't slept well. Her face kept coming back to him. Not for its beauty, though it was arresting in an alien, glacial way, but because of what it didn't show. Most people wore their hurt like armor or scars. She had erased hers, repressed it into silence. And yet, he could feel it radiating from her, like heat from buried embers. Avlith. Her name, like her, had the texture of a half-forgotten word in an old dialect. Distant, lyrical, hard to place. He thought back to the night before. That slight angle she'd turned her chair. A small act, barely noticeable, but intentional. She hadn't closed the door, and she hadn't locked it. He returned to his work with effort, diving into the archive's layers of restricted texts, flipping through censored entries about Eruvian memory rituals, ancestral inheritance algorithms, and the quiet purging of non-viable minds. It was all cold, sterile language, but he understood what it meant. People like her weren't just cast out. They were deleted. A few hours later, he heard it, the faint electric whir of her chair. She moved with silence, but he'd already memorized the sound of her presence. She hovered in the threshold of the room, motionless, watching. He didn't turn to face her, didn't smile, just gestured toward the seat across from him. "You're welcome to join me." No pressure. The chair moved forward slowly, no more than a meter, then stopped. It was enough. He activated the projection interface between them. A glyph lit up in midair, Eruvian script, fluid and curved, like wind carved into water. This symbol shows up a lot in your culture's oldest memory threads. I've seen it translated as to preserve, but sometimes it appears in texts that imply refusal, or even defiance. He didn't expect her to answer, but she leaned forward slightly, studied the glyph. Her silver eyes narrowed. Without speaking, she reached out and rotated the symbol just a few degrees, adjusted its alignment. A small movement, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably deliberate. Then she drew her hand back. He didn't speak, just watched her. And for the first time, he felt it. Not just silence, but engagement. Her response. Something was beginning. They sat that way for a while, not looking at each other, just existing in the same space. She observed as he continued his research. Occasionally, her eyes drifted back to the projection, focused, thoughtful. When she eventually turned to leave, she gave the slightest nod, a breath of acknowledgement. After she left, Derek stayed seated, watching the glyph she had touched. He wanted to ask what it meant when she rotated it, but he wouldn't. Not yet. Instead, he whispered to the empty air, "Thank you." It wasn't for the correction. It was for the trust. That night, she returned. He was in the same place, this time reading aloud softly to himself from a fragmentary oral history recovered from the Outer Belt colonies. A story about an old Terran woman who planted trees on a planet no one had visited in 3 centuries. Avlith hovered behind him. He didn't stop reading. When he finished the passage, he looked back. She was watching him, and this time, she didn't turn away. He closed the file, carefully. Let the silence return. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "your people believe memory can be shaped, curated. That silence protects legacy." Avlith didn't speak. Her face gave nothing away. But sometimes silence erases the wrong people. Still no response. But she didn't leave. And then she did something new. She moved forward, almost a meter closer, and turned her chair, not away, not to the side, but to face him directly. He met her eyes and didn't look away. "Do you know why I said yes to this assignment?" he asked. A pause. "I read your file, or what was left of it. Most of it had been redacted. Your name appeared exactly once in a ledger about asset reassignment. One line buried under officialese." He exhaled slowly. "I've spent my life chasing lost stories, the kind that were meant to be erased. But I've never met one walking." She didn't respond, but her fingers tightened slightly around the hoverchair's side panel. He noticed. Later, long after she had returned to her quarters, he passed by her door and saw that she had turned off the privacy seal. The faint blue light that usually glowed to signal "Do Not Disturb" had been dimmed to amber, conditional access granted. It was her way of saying, "I see you." Inside her room, Avlith sat staring at the ceiling, the light strips flickering softly in response to her neural patterns. They glowed pale gold now. Not grief, not anger, possibility. She hadn't meant to stay in the archive room that long. She had intended to observe, nothing more. But his voice, unforced, warm, had made her forget herself. The way he read, not just the words, the weight of them. Yarian had once read to her, too, but it had always felt like a performance. A theater of intellect. She'd loved him once, trusted him. She remembered the moment she fell, no, was pushed. The feel of his fingers on hers, then gone. The instant betrayal. The way the archive roof cracked above her, and the world went soundless as her spine shattered. She had dreamed of that moment for years. But tonight, she dreamed of Derek's voice instead. The way he said her name without flinching. And for the first time in a long time, she wondered if it might be safe to be heard again. The rain on Aruvia wasn't natural. It came in slow, calculated pulses, released through the atmosphere from cloud dispersers hidden above the biodome. It never poured, never thundered. It simply fell, light and even like a memory, trying not to be remembered too loudly. That morning, the archive lights flickered in sync with the rainfall. Derek sat cross-legged on the floor near the central console, surrounded by fragments of glyph sheets and volatile memory glass scrolls. Each fragment floated in midair, reconstructed as holographic strands, while he tried to piece together the structure of an old Aruvian timeline that had been partially purged. He didn't look up when Avlith entered, but he felt the shift in the air. Not just the quiet hum of her hover chair, but something else. Her presence now held a different weight. Not intrusive, not defensive. Willing. She stopped just within the threshold and watched him in silence. He knew she was there not as an observer, but as someone deciding whether she still belonged to the world he was building in front of him. I think this glyph, Derek said, pointing at one of the floating symbols, was once a marker for exile. But someone tried to recode it to mean transition. The symbols are similar, but not identical. He glanced over his shoulder, not directly at her, just enough to invite her in. Someone tried to rewrite a punishment into a passage. He didn't expect a response. But to his surprise, she moved forward, closer this time, and reached toward the projection. With practiced precision, she adjusted the positioning of the exile glyph, then tapped a faint symbol buried beneath the layers. Not exile, Derek said slowly, reading her intent. Erasure. She didn't nod, but he saw the confirmation in her eyes. They worked like that for a while, communicating through movement, arrangement, silence. Not touching, not speaking, but fully engaged. He watched the way her expression changed when she focused, how her hands moved with restrained grace, how her breathing synchronized with the rhythm of her mind. He imagined what she had been like before the injury, moving through vaulted archive halls, trailing her hands along memory crystals, feet bare, mind open. And now she was here, severed but not stopped. I filed a request yesterday, he said after a while, carefully, to access the subcrypt. That got her attention. Her chair shifted almost imperceptibly. They denied it, obviously. Too many locked layers, too much historical sensitivity. But I think there's a back route. A physical one, through the older part of the structure, beneath the west wing. She was silent, but he felt her considering. I'd like to try it, he added, but I won't go without you. The room held still for a breath. Then she reached out and adjusted a single strand in the archive's floating map, one that veered west underground. Derek smiled. Together, they descended into the older tunnels that afternoon. The route was dim and thick with humidity. Condensation clung to the crystalline walls like breath held too long. The air was heavier down here, denser, filled with the scent of oxidized metal, damp clay, and memory mold. This whole wing was sealed off after a cave-in, Derek said as he led the way, his lantern casting long shadows behind them. They said it was unstable, but I think they just wanted it forgotten. He paused, glancing back. Are you all right? Avlith nodded, slowly. The hover chair was equipped for uneven terrain. It adjusted its elevation with the slope, maintaining stability. Still, her hands gripped the armrests more tightly now. You don't have to do this, he said gently. Her gaze met his, clear, unwavering. I'm already doing it, it said. They reached a breach in the wall, a section of collapsed archive where crystalline storage clusters lay shattered under fallen stone. Derek approached a panel, brushed the dust off a dormant interface. I'll need a minute. He didn't see her face shift, didn't notice the way her posture stiffened until a sudden sound echoed through the tunnel. A sharp metallic click. Not stone, not glass. Derek turned in time to see her flinch. Then came the voice. Don't touch that panel. They weren't alone. A figure stepped from a far end of the corridor, cloaked in archive gray, but the posture was too rigid, the voice too polished to be a technician. The figure held a slim baton, non-lethal but painful, and a badge that glowed with administrative clearance. Derek stepped between Avlith and the intruder instinctively. "This area is closed. We're here under request." The figure tilted their head. "The council doesn't authorize trespassers." "I'm not a trespasser." "She is," the figure said coldly. "And she's under investigation for misusing classified cultural data." Derek's pulse jumped. "She hasn't touched anything except fragments you tried to erase. And even then, she's only corrected the lies." The baton crackled. Avlith's fingers twitched on her armrest. Derek saw the spark of something behind her eyes. Rage, buried deep under years of silence. "She's not leaving with you," he said, voice calm but firm. The enforcer didn't respond, but the threat was clear. Derek held his ground, and behind him, Avlith's voice, and used for weeks, broke the silence like a blade drawn from a sheath. "Enough. Just one word." The enforcer paused, stared, and then, with calculated disinterest, turned and left without another word. The sound of retreating footsteps echoed like thunder in the stillness left behind. Derek exhaled, only then realizing how tightly his fists had clenched. "You spoke," he whispered, almost to himself. Avlith closed her eyes. "I know," she said. Her voice was low, almost broken, but steady. They stood there for a while, neither moving, neither speaking again. The breach in the wall hummed softly behind them. The glyphs in the broken interface flickered, waiting to be remembered. When they finally returned to the upper levels, neither said a word. But later that night, as Derek made tea, he found her already in the central room, waiting. Not behind him, but beside him. And when he offered her the cup, her hand met his without flinching. The day after her voice broke the air, after she faced the enforcer and chose to speak, Avlith didn't retreat into silence. She didn't hide. She was already in the archive chamber when Derek woke, seated beside the projection field, reviewing collapsed timelines as if she'd never left them. But this time, something in her posture had changed. She no longer sat like someone occupying space out of necessity. She sat like she belonged there. And maybe, just maybe, like she remembered how that used to feel. When Derek entered the room, she didn't look up, but she spoke, clear, quiet, and calm. "Do you want the truth?" He paused, startled not by the question, but by the tone. Not guarded, not resigned, just ready. "Yes," he said. She didn't begin right away. Instead, she reached for a glyph, rotated it absently in the air, an old scholar's habit, reflexive and unconscious. Then she exhaled slowly and began. "I wasn't born this way," she said. "I used to run barefoot through the Old West vaults. I danced in the low-grav chambers. I trained with the other mind weavers until I could outpace them all, not just in knowledge, but in movement, rhythm, balance. The body was part of the weave. A moving mind is a sharper one." Her voice didn't crack, but Derek could hear the weight pressing against every word. "My people train memory through motion. Breath pacing, nerve tempo, physical recall. We learn to walk through thoughts. So when I lost my legs, I didn't just stop walking." She looked at him now, direct, unflinching. "I lost my language." Derek said nothing. He wouldn't interrupt this. "Not now. I was researching forbidden strata, deep archival layers that predate the caste system. Ones that suggested the mind weavers were once chosen by experience, not bloodlines. If that were proven, it would unravel our entire cultural hierarchy." She paused. Her eyes lowered slightly. Yarian knew this. He was my research partner. More than that, I trusted him. Thought he believed in what we were doing. Derek nodded once. He remembered the name from the sealed disciplinary logs, scrubbed, anonymized, but still traceable if you knew where to look. "We found something," she continued, "beneath the western vaults. A sealed cache of neurostructural data, early memory link experiments, emotive-based recall, responsive archival systems, full-body cognition theory. It could have changed everything." Her hands tightened on her chair's armrests. "And it did. Just not how I thought." Her voice dropped. The tremor wasn't natural. The platform I stood on had already been weakened, and when it buckled, I reached back. I reached for him. Her eyes flicked to the wall, unfocused now, as if looking into the memory itself. And he wasn't there. Derek felt the chill roll up his spine. You think he let you fall? Avlith shook her head, slow and firm. I know he did. And I think he pushed. Just enough. Just when no one could see. She leaned back. The glyph she'd been holding dissolved between her fingers. I remember the sound of my spine snapping. I remember not feeling my legs. I remember waking to find my name removed from the research registry, my caste identification revoked, and a reassignment order waiting at my bedside. And you didn't say anything? Derek asked, not as a challenge, but as a whisper. Avlith gave a dry, tired smile. Say what? To whom? They'd already decided. I wasn't a mind weaver anymore. I was void-touched. Dead weight. She exhaled. You know how they framed it? That I sacrificed myself to protect the archive. They made it poetic, heroic, and clean. Her voice hardened. They wrote me into legend to make erasing me easier. Silence settled between them. It wasn't empty. It vibrated with everything that had been unsaid for years. Derek finally spoke. In your research? Purged. Mostly. But fragments survived. The council couldn't scrub everything. Derek leaned forward. Then we find it. Avlith hesitated. You'd risk that? For me? No, he said. Not just for you. For the truth. For the record. For every voice that was buried because it didn't fit someone else's script. She studied him carefully, tried to read past the idealism. Is that why you're here? He nodded. I leaked a protected document once. Thought I was liberating knowledge. It started a rebellion. People died. I promised myself after that I'd only unbury the stories that needed to live. She didn't look away. And you think I'm one of those stories? I know you are. She blinked, slow and deliberate, then helped me finish the one they tried to erase. Later that afternoon, they returned to the sublayer. Derek bypassed the council's surface lockouts, but it was Avlith who found the buried sequences, her old neural signature still encoded in the lowest vaults. They activated the remaining fragments. What emerged took her breath away. Projected into the air was a skeletal prototype, an early design for a bioadaptive prosthetic system. Not mechanical, not neural, not exactly. It had been based on her theory of emotive resonance, translating feeling into motion, memory into function. The model hadn't been approved for further study, but it was there. It had survived. This was your work? Derek asked, barely audible. She nodded. It was a dream. A long one I never got to wake into. His voice was low, reverent. It might still be real. She turned to him, eyes shimmering, not with tears, but with light, with fire. I don't want to walk for them, she whispered. I don't want to prove anything. You don't have to, he said. Walk because you remember how it felt, because you deserve to move again. Avlith looked at her own hands, trembling slightly now, as if her body were already preparing for something new. Something remembered. They called me a sacrifice, she said. They were wrong, he replied. You were a survivor. She didn't speak again, but in the silence that followed, her breath deepened. Her spine straightened. Her hands relaxed on the armrests of the chair. And for the first time since her fall, she closed her eyes, not in fear, not in grief, but in hope. The workshop smelled like stormlight and metal, the air crisp with ionized particles, humming softly beneath the arched ceiling. Morning filtered through the transparent roof, casting fractured gold over the floor where Avlith stood still, not yet ready to move. Derek adjusted the last calibration node at her hip. The subdermal links had fused cleanly overnight, each responsive thread pulsing in sync with her resting heart rate. It had taken days to prepare, physical, neural, emotional. They hadn't rushed. The Echo Gate interface required intention, not urgency. You don't have to do anything today, he said gently, still crouched beside her. I know, she replied. Her voice was calm, but not empty. But I want to. He straightened slowly, taking a step back, giving her space. Around them, the lab remained still. No background chatter, no data projections flashing above her. only the rhythmic beat of her breath, steady and low. She inhaled and closed her eyes. Memory flowed in, not the moment of the fall, not the stillness after. She pushed past that. She searched deeper, back to her childhood in the mountain vaults, before silence, before betrayal. She had danced once, not for an audience, but for herself, in long, fluid strides across memory stone tiles, breath sinking to her people's ancestral threads. Every step a prayer, every turn a declaration. She remembered the sensation of spinning, bare feet on warm stone, the world blurring joyfully. Her body pulsed. Her legs responded. Not with a full step, not yet. Just a tremble, a flex at the knee joint, a shift in balance, a twitch of intention answered by form. She gasped. Derek watched without moving, barely breathing. Her eyes opened. They moved, she whispered. They did, he said. Avlith exhaled slowly and tried again. She focused not on standing, but on remembering movement as a language. The echo gate didn't respond to simple muscle signals. It was trained to listen for rhythm and emotion, to movement stored in memory. She had trained her whole life for this, even if she hadn't known it. She centered her weight, bent slightly forward, activated breath control, and rose. The chair behind her hissed as it unlocked automatically, gliding away. Avlith stood upright, legs pulsing beneath her, not perfectly steady, but stable. Her arms stretched slightly to counterbalance, eyes locked forward. Her lips parted, and a sound escaped her that Derek couldn't name. It wasn't a sob, not joy, something deeper, something like returning. She took a step. It wasn't graceful. Her core tilted too far, the legs lagging behind her breath pattern. Her right foot skidded sideways. She stumbled. Derek reached out too late to stop it. Her body hit the mat hard, elbow first, then shoulder. She didn't cry out, didn't even wince, but she didn't rise either. He rushed forward, kneeling beside her, arms ready. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice had thinned. "You don't have to prove anything," he said quietly. "I didn't fall for them," she murmured, still staring at the ceiling. "But it still feels like I failed." "You didn't," he said. "You tried to stand. You remembered how. And tomorrow, you'll do it again." Avlith turned her head toward him. Her cheeks were damp, but not from tears. Sweat glistened at her temple. Her fingers curled in frustration. "I thought it would feel like victory." "Does it?" "No," she admitted. "It feels like being born." He let her words settle in the air. Then he sat beside her, not helping, not moving, just being there. "Then let it feel like that," he said softly. "Messy. Real. Yours." They stayed like that for a while, floor-bound, side by side. The ceiling crystals dimmed slightly to mirror the shift in emotion, casting them in a cocoon of violet dusk. Eventually, she sat up on her own. He didn't reach for her. She didn't ask him to. The following days blurred into a quiet routine. Avlith trained in private, before dawn, before the system activated its memory logs. She didn't want applause, didn't want watchers, just herself, the echo of her steps, and the quiet voice in her head that said again. She fell 7 times. On the 8th, she walked the length of the hall, alone. Later that morning, Derek found her leaning against the inner railing of the observation balcony. The sun had risen fully, its warmth painting her skin gold, her hair almost translucent. The wind carried faint notes of blooming spice root and the churring of low-atmos insects in the courtyard beyond. "You walked without me," he said. "You were sleeping." Rude. She didn't turn. "I didn't want you to see me fall again." "You think I'd care?" "I know you would. That's the problem." He stepped beside her, resting his forearms on the railing. "So what changed this time?" "I stopped trying to walk like I did before," she said after a pause, "and started walking like I do now." He nodded. "How does that feel?" "Strange." She looked down at her fingers. "And honest." They stood in silence, letting the sun warm their shoulders. Then, without looking at him, Avlith asked, "Do you know why I agreed to the integration contract?" Derek's brow furrowed. "I thought you had no choice." "I had choices. Fewer than most, but still mine." She turned to him then. I signed because I didn't want to disappear. Not completely, even if it meant being given away. His chest tightened. And now I remember who I am, she said. And I know why I stayed. He searched her face, trying to read beneath the words. What? Avlet stepped close, not urgently, not cautiously. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. Because you never tried to rewrite me. You just read carefully. Her fingers stayed there, feeling his heartbeat. She didn't pull away. He covered her hand with his, gently, without pressure. In that quiet moment, something shifted between them, not new, but clearer. A tension that had always been there, now understood. I don't know what happens next, she said. You don't have to. She nodded. But I know this. I won't walk into it alone. Their foreheads touched. No kiss. Not yet. But the breath they shared said enough. That night, Avlith slept without pain for the first time in years. The system had adjusted fully. The echo of her breath no longer triggered false resistance or overcorrection. Her body moved in harmony, no longer resisting itself. In the dark, Derek lay beside her, not touching, just present. And when she turned toward him, half asleep and curled slightly into his warmth, he didn't move away. He whispered, "You're home." And though she was already dreaming, her fingers brushed his arm in answer. The morning she took her first full walk across the archive, no one watched. That was how Avlith wanted it. The central chamber was silent, the echo of her bare feet on the stone floor soft and deliberate. The echo gate legs no longer hesitated. They responded now, without protest, adjusting not just to her weight, but to her intent. Each step was no longer an attempt. It was a declaration. She passed between the memory pillars, brushing her fingertips against the glow-etched crystal, not to lean, not to steady herself, but to feel them. They hummed faintly, familiar. By the time Derek arrived with 2 steaming mugs, she was already on the far side of the room, silhouetted against a mural of restored glyphwork. You didn't wait, he said. You were sleeping. Still rude. She turned. Then I suppose you'll need to forgive me. I already have, he said softly, handing her the mug. They drank in silence. Outside, wind stirred the outer trees, their crystalline leaves clinking gently. Light filtered through the translucent dome, casting shifting blue and gold across the floor. Something's different today, Derek said. Avlith nodded. I dreamed of my mother. He waited. She used to say, when we walk, the ground remembers us. I never understood. Until now. What does it mean to you? That we leave more than footprints. We leave who we've become. She looked down at her legs. I used to think I had to get back to who I was before the fall. But I don't need that anymore. Derek didn't speak. He didn't need to. The quiet stretched until the archive lights dimmed slightly, signaling an incoming message. Avlith turned. Official markings. Priority status. The High Caste Council had summoned her. Not to welcome, but to reclaim. The journey to the Citadel was silent. Avlith sat straight in the transport, not asking Derek to come. He didn't ask if she needed him. He was already there. Below them, Oruvia unrolled like a map of memory. Spires, ravines, veined forests, and stone vaults long forgotten. But not forgiven. She hadn't returned here since being wheeled out, paralyzed, erased. Now, she returned on her own terms. Almost. The Citadel loomed ahead, a structure of crystalline arrogance, woven in glowing thread. Sacred to some, hollow to her. They stepped into the threshold. Where once her name had been etched above the arch, there was only blank shimmer. She paused, but only for a breath. They think if they unwrite you, you'll vanish, Derek said. They're wrong, she said, and entered. The chamber she was brought to wasn't the full council hall. Not yet. A preparatory audience. 3 lower-ranking functionaries waited, recorders, not judges. A protocol official stood. You've been observed walking. The council acknowledges your restored mobility. Avlith said nothing. If you seek reintegration, the official continued, we are authorized to begin review. But this would include conditions. Restrictions. I'm not requesting reintegration, she said. You were once honored. Your return could be seen as a step toward unity. I didn't return to unite, with anything that tried to erase me. There was silence. Then what do you want, Scholar Var? She looked him in the eye. I want to know how far your silence reaches. And then she left. Back at the outer archive that evening, the world felt different. Lighter. The sun dipped behind the valley ridge, casting long shadows. Inside, the halls welcomed them with warmth and light. Avlith walked slowly to the balcony and rested her hands on the rail. Derek joined her. Was it what you expected? No, but it told me enough. They'll push harder now. I hope they do. He looked at her. Why? So I can answer without hesitation next time. He didn't press. Instead, he leaned beside her, letting the wind tangle their hair. What will you do now? He asked. I'll keep walking, she said. She turned, not dramatically, but with certainty, and placed her hand gently over his chest. I don't need their name to feel whole anymore. His fingers closed over hers. You have ours, he said. And she smiled. The archive lights flickered gently overhead, like distant stars breathing in the dark. The message came just before sunrise, wrapped in formal syntax and veiled threat. 3 pulses blinked from the archive's communication node. Priority signal. Avlith stood at the balcony rail, watching the sky bleed from indigo to copper. She didn't flinch. She simply turned, accepted the transmission, and read the words that had been designed to provoke dread. She felt nothing but clarity. Behind her, Derek stirred. Them. She nodded once. The full council this time. They waited. They watched, she corrected. And now they want to be seen deciding. He stepped closer, the early light catching the line of his jaw. You don't have to go. I know, but you will. She met his eyes. Yes. The journey back to the Citadel was quieter than the first. There was no tension in her limbs this time, no sense of walking into a storm unprepared. What weighed on her now was not fear, but responsibility. To the girl who had once been wheeled into that place in silence. And to those watching her now. Derek sat across from her, eyes steady. He didn't speak, but his presence spoke volumes. No longer protector, no longer observer. Witness. Outside, Aruvia glinted with morning dew. Glass-barked trees caught sunlight like mirrors, and the mountains rippled with memory thread veins that shimmered faintly, as though aware of her return. When the citadel rose in the distance, Avlith didn't look away. Inside, the temperature was colder than she remembered. Perhaps that was intentional. The chamber had not changed. The memory threads still floated overhead like strands of frozen lightning, silent and curated. The dais was lit in half-shadow. 10 figures sat in ceremonial robes, their eyes unreadable. Avlith walked to the center without hesitation. She wore no symbols, no caste ring, no honor pin, only her name and the weight of having survived being forgotten. Derek stood behind her, silent. Avlith Var, the High Speaker began. You are summoned in regard to your recent activities and the reactivation of restricted systems. I didn't ask to be summoned, she replied calmly, but I came, because this time you'll hear me. That silenced the whispering strands. The speaker adjusted slightly. You defied protocol. You trespassed into sealed knowledge domains. You activated unapproved prosthetic systems. I restored what you buried. You were exiled. I was erased. Her voice did not rise. That made it more terrifying. One of the younger counselors leaned forward. What is it you want, then? Recognition. Avlith let the silence linger. Then, no. I want honesty. I want the story told true. And if the truth threatens the harmony of the caste structure, then the harmony was a lie. The ambient lighting dimmed, reacting to the growing emotional temperature. The memory threads above her shimmered in agitation. System logic, sensing tension, archiving it. Avlith took one step forward. You buried me in silence because I reminded you of your failure. I was not born broken. I was pushed. My spine shattered because another scholar feared my success. And instead of standing with me, you struck my name from the vaults and called it a tragic accident. You recovered, the speaker said. No, she snapped. I rebuilt. Without your help. You left me voiceless and paralyzed. I taught myself to move again. I reclaimed systems you considered lost. and now you summon me to bargain. A pause. Reintegration is not a punishment, another said. It's mercy. Mercy would have been lifting me up when I fell, she said, not stepping over me to protect your legacy. Derek didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence anchored her. The high speaker leaned forward. This is not how the system works. This is not how society holds together. I know, Avlith said, and that's why I'm building something else. Another pause. You refuse reinstatement? She nodded. Then you're formally declared dissonant. You forfeit your place within the recorded lineage of the Oruvian scholars. You will not be remembered. Avlith tilted her head. That's where you're wrong. She turned and walked from the center. As she passed beneath the archway, something shifted, a sharp pulse. The memory threads above her shimmered, then bent. One twisted, then another. Suddenly, a golden glow ignited midair. Names scrolled in ancestral script, silent, curated names of the honored. And then a new one wrote itself in light. Avlith VHR, not input by the council, but by the archive itself. The system had remembered. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Avlith stopped but didn't look back. She didn't have to. The glow warmed her back like a second sun. Let them see what they had tried to erase. Let them witness what silence could not contain. That evening, the skies above the valley shifted to gold. The outer archive outpost was quiet, peaceful. The half-finished towers of the new campus caught the last sunlight, their surfaces gleaming with potential. The wind carried the scent of cut vines and blooming crystal bark. It smelled like a future being born. Avla stood barefoot on the courtyard stone. Her body had never felt lighter. Derek appeared beside her, holding a small bundle wrapped in sealcloth. They sent another message, he said. She raised an eyebrow. More threats. No, he unwrapped the bundle and handed it to her. Inside, a clear memory orb. Old, raw, unregistered. She lifted it to her temple and closed her eyes. A voice bloomed within. Scholar Var, I don't know if you remember me. I was your student. Before the accident. Before your name vanished. I never forgot your voice. I never forgot what you taught us. If there's space for people like me, for minds they never wanted, please let me come. Let me learn again. Avlith lowered the orb, her fingers trembling slightly. They're coming, she said. Derek nodded. Because you stood. Later that night, she walked the inner chamber alone. Overhead, the memory threads shimmered in pale light. She reached toward one. It responded. A pulse of recognition. A ripple of emotion, joy, grief, resistance, love. Not one overwritten by authority, but preserved. And into that thread, Avlith whispered, You did not break me. You paused me. But I resumed. And now I speak not just for myself, but for all you buried. The thread pulsed in answer. Then another joined. Then another. Soon, the entire chamber glowed, soft pulses spreading across the lattice like heartbeat echoes. A new archive was being born. One that did not sort truth by obedience. One that did not fear brokenness. Avlith turned. She walked the length of the chamber slowly, every step inscribing her presence into the stone. And when she stopped at the central strand, the one the system had chosen to mark with her name, she signed it again. No title, no embellishment, just Avlith, the girl who fell, the woman who rose. The archive they could never silence. The sun was just beginning to rise when Avlith stepped barefoot into the garden. Oruvia's twin stars had yet to fully breach the horizon, but already the sky was painted with the soft promise of gold and coral. The crystalline vines that lined the walkway pulsed with faint bioluminescence, like they too were waiting for light. Dew clung to the leaves, shimmering in the morning hush. The air tasted clean, alive. She walked slowly, the echo gate legs responding fluidly now, their gentle hum perfectly attuned to her breath. Each step was quiet, deliberate, sacred. Not because walking was rare now, it wasn't, but because she had learned never to take movement, or mornings, or peace for granted. Behind her, the door hissed open. She didn't turn. She knew the sound of his steps. Derek joined her on the path without a word, holding 2 mugs, steam rising from each. He wore one of his loose Terran shirts, the collar open, his hair uncombed, still sleep-warm. "You beat me again," he said, handing her the tea. "You always assume I sleep." "You don't." "I do," she said, accepting the mug, "but only after you do." He smiled. "Why?" "Because it feels safer that way." They walked together in silence for a time, winding slowly through the garden's perimeter. The sun crested the ridge, casting their shadows long and soft across the grass like crystal underfoot. Birds, not birds exactly, but something close, fluttered overhead in silver arcs. At the far end of the garden stood a new addition, a bench carved from pale stone and inlaid with memory thread filaments. She had designed it herself, a place not for reflection, but for presence. For now, they sat, shoulders brushing. For a moment, nothing passed between them but warmth. Sheer breath. The familiar rhythm they'd fallen into since the day she'd said no to the council. "You seem lighter," Derek said. "I am." "Because you stood?" "No," she said. "Because I didn't stand alone." He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. "You never had to." She set her tea aside and turned toward him, folding one leg beneath her. "There was a time," she said, "when I thought any love offered to someone broken was pity, that no one would touch a ruined body or listen to a ruined voice." He reached out, fingertips tracing the outer curve of her hand, then her wrist. "You were never ruined." She tilted her head. "But you never tried to fix me, either." "I didn't need to," he said softly. "You were always enough." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she lifted her hand, slid her fingers into his hair, slowly, tenderly, like the motion itself was a secret. "May I kiss you?" she asked. He smiled. "You don't need permission," he said, voice barely a whisper. "But I'll give it anyway." She leaned in, breath brushing against his lips before contact. The kiss wasn't urgent. It wasn't hurried or hungry. It was gentle, savoring. It was the kind of kiss built over days and nights of quiet gestures and unspoken trust. An accumulation of looks held too long, of hands meeting mid-reach, of silences that had meant everything. When they parted, they stayed close, forehead to forehead, eyes closed, hearts beating together beneath the morning sun. The garden around them glowed a little brighter. "I love you," she said simply. His hands tightened around hers. "I know," he replied, "and I love you too." She rested her head against his shoulder, sighing into the curve of his neck. And in that moment, there were no counsels, no echoes of pain, no titles to reclaim or systems to resist. There was only this, her body whole in its own truth, his presence solid and safe, and a day with no shadows left between them.